it doesn't have borders, you could say. So it's just, pretty interesting. So I would definitely kind of maybe talk about that a little bit, kind of, but I think I have enough to write about in Acts without even going anywhere. Acts 28.
Zach, do you
Yeah.
are you? This isn't online, right? This is a school,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's
do you find?
online.
Oh, the whole thing's done online.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were in a school.
It is a school. I don't like physically go to school, but it's a university, Liberty University.
Oh, okay. So you're online university.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And say I was just wondering, where I guess you wouldn't even know how people stand in their eschatology, that kind of thing, hey?
Oh, this school, they teach, obviously, they're, dispensational, they're,
Right.
pre-tribulation rapture, pretty much for the most
Mm-hmm.
part.
And what if you disagree?
That's
Just keep
what's
your mouth
nice.
shut and go through?
I did one class, which was a survey of the New Testament. And I mean, because there's so much stuff already. I mean, I could, if I didn't have to go to work, I could obviously go deeper into a lot of the studies and then actually write my teacher something, which, they're open, like I did have on my computer because when we were reading the book of Revelation, they actually went through the dating of it, and they gave a couple reasons why they don't favor the early date of Revelation because of a couple reasons, and which were, they pointed to internal evidence.
Well, if they point to the early, then they know that opens up the door. So I mean,
exactly. So if you just shut, Revelations, it says it's written in the 90s. Boom, preterism is just fell apart.
right.
So that's their main motive. So I was going to actually write the teacher after the class was over, because obviously Revelation's the last book. It was the last week. I had already passed the class. I'm done. I had like a week to do some other stuff, and I had typed up something, but I just didn't have full time to really give it my all. So I just didn't send it to the teacher. But what's nice about this class, this Acts class, is at the end of this sentence where it says use the Bible, GER, and one additional scholarly source to research this issue and present your position. So I guess I have the freedom to actually say, hey, no, I don't believe that there's going to be a future kingdom. And as long as if I answer the question, use the sources, quote the Bible, I'll probably get a passing grade, even though maybe the teacher will disagree. It's presenting my position, So I guess I have the liberty to explain or talk about what I believe. But for the most part, obviously, I remember for the class where it says, what date was Revelation written? I obviously chose 90. Even I don't believe that.
Oh, really?
If it's a multiple choice, I'm not going to get the question wrong just to be like, yeah, oh, sweet. Now I got a C. Awesome.
They've they have established that, so to speak, haven't they? 90.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of remember, I mean, I could probably pull up that class, and I can read, or I actually think I put it in the Discord, but it was so long ago. It was my Bible 110. Because it was pretty fascinating. Because they didn't really go to the external sources, which usually that's the main foundation, which is that what was it, Irenaeus, or who said something in 170 that
that was
stalled John.
Irenaeus, yeah.
Irenaeus. Yeah, so
He said what?
the reason that the church, for the most part, believes that Revelation was written in 90s because there's something that has to do with a second century church father that was living in it was written in 170 AD. So this is well over 100 years after the destruction of the temple. and he mentioned some writing where that they either saw, because the question was, who's the Antichrist? And they're just like saying, oh, if John, wanted you to know his name or something like that. And he says something about,
Yeah, the debate was basically, it was they couldn't tell if Irenaeus was trying to say that John was seen not that long ago in our age near the end of Domitian's reign, or if the vision was seen not that long ago. But the point that Irenaeus was trying to make was none of that. He was just trying to say, like, dudes, like, stop freaking out about the Antichrist. If he wanted to, like, if you needed to know exactly who the Antichrist was, then he would have told you, because we saw him not that long ago, right? But they like to hang on to this and be like, oh, see, he said that we saw him in the Domitian's reign, which is like 90, way after, so.
See, so this, I found the book, so I got it. So they're talking about the date here, and it says, most serious scholars propose a date either in the time of Nero. So that's the big thing. Is it during the reign of Nero or during the reign of Domitian, which is 95, 96, they're saying. They say, for the original composition. However, those favoring the early date have no external evidence prior to the 6th century, it's 550 AD, and are forced to attempt to rely on supposed internal evidence to support their view. Ironically, those who lived closest to Nero's time did not believe the book was written then. Mark Hitchcock summarizes the external evidence in the following charts. And then they show, actually they have some guy's name, Hegespippus.
Yeah, Hegespippus or
Hegespippus,
something.
whatever you say that. Yeah, they're saying that he actually, and then Irenaeus, how you pronounce it, is in 180. But that's supposedly there, but
Right. Yeah,
this
and
is the part
thing. Yeah, the Domitian thing is also all of those Roman emperors all had the same names. They all had Domitian in their names. So it's like, which Domitian are you talking about? Nero Domitian or Domitian or like Vespasian Domitian? Like which one?
Yeah, and then here I want to just read one little paragraph, but this is the one where I kind of took some notes, and then I was going to answer what they're saying. So it says the internal evidence for the late date of Revelation is equally impressive. The conditions of the churches of Asia Minor show all the characteristics of a second generation churches lapsing from their original zeal and enthusiasm. So, for example, Paul's earlier letters to the church at Ephesus or his letter to Timothy, who was at Ephesus, does not mention the issues raised in Revelation 2, 1 through 7. Now, side note, I remember a while ago, a long time ago, there was a video that Rob had posted of this Baptist pastor talking about preterism and showing his congregation why it's fake. And this is the only other person besides what I read here. And when I read this, I was like, oh, wow. And it like clicked in my mind. The video that Rob posted probably like maybe a year and a half ago. And it was why Revelation could not be written in the early date. And in Revelation 2, it talks about the church of Ephesus. Right, how you can see in verse 1, it says, to the angel or the messenger of the congregation of Ephesus. And, it's kind of like a bad thing. In verse 4, nevertheless, I have something against you because you left your first love. Right, so this is why it seems like why this author, what I just read, this book that I'm reading from my class, why it says that the conditions of the churches of Asia Minor, which is the church of at Ephesus, is one of them. It shows all the characteristics of a second generation lapsing from their original zeal and enthusiasm. So I guess like when you read the book of Ephesus, it's a bright, living church. They're being blessed, and there's no harsh, I guess, judgments on them. So if you do the math, if we believe that the book of Revelation was written in like 61, 62, 63, 64, somewhere around that time period, the book of Ephesians was probably written in what do I guess people say, maybe they even say like close to 60. So it could be like 58, 59. So pretty much what that video was saying that Rob had posted and what this author is saying is that it doesn't seem that short period of time that the church would go from such a good church to such a bad church in Revelation. So that's why they say, oh, look, it probably fits a church written 30 years later, which is the second generation, which is written, now they could have fallen away from their first love.
Doesn't it
So
say somewhere that, like, isn't there a verse somewhere that says, like, if you don't, like, fix this, like, I'm going to take your candle away, I'm going to put your candle out, or something like that? Because I'm just thinking, like, there's only one way in my mind that the candle can be put out, as it were. And that's the Roman army comes through and squashes you.
Yeah, I mean, well, the next verse in Revelation 2:5 does say, then remember from where you have fallen and repent. So it does seem that this church there's something happened. Somebody must have rose up and caused a ruckus and made them kind of fall behind from where they were when Paul was writing to them in the book of Ephesians. And again, what was fascinating is that this author in my school's book says that's their first like stab besides external evidence. So when they talk about internal evidence to prove the late date, that's their first shot pretty much at the early date. Look at this. And I will say, when I first heard that from that guy on that video, I was very like puzzled. I was like, that actually does make a little sense, to be honest. He has, a point to make. But I believe I figured out the reason why. But that was one of the things that I was going to write out to the teacher, and I just didn't really have all the time to do that.
Okay, real quick. Acts 28:28 is significant. Just read.
But wait, there's the other part. No, just kidding. All right, Acts 28.
28. Now, you've got to realize this is just
say it again. Acts what?
Acts 28:28.
Okay. Oh, that's probably a famous verse for you. 28:28.
It is significant. When you look at it, and it says it's the third to the last verse in the entire book. So what the book wants to convey to you, it's driving home its point. The author of Acts is driving home his point. So look at Acts 28:28 as a definition, and then I'll tell you the term it's defining. So read.
So it says, 28:28. It says, then let it be known to you that the salvation of God was sent to the nations, and they will hear.
Okay, the term that it's defining is mentioned in verse 31, the last verse of the book.
Proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching the things concerning the Lord Jesus Christ.
So the
with all
kingdom
freedom.
of God is defined as salvation has come to the Gentiles because they will listen.
Not bad. Yeah, I like that one.
Did anyone read ahead in Ezekiel? Earth to earth.
What'd you say, Rob?
I said, did anyone read ahead in Ezekiel?
Now I know they read, I guess, what, chapter 4, maybe?
Yeah, I think we did
Read
1
up
through
to
3.
5. We actually read through 5.
Oh, okay. Well then, even better.
So you're on chapter 6 right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing before we go to Ezekiel and Revelation, the internal evidence absolutely proves that it was written prior to the destruction of the temple. When you look at the evidence of the mystery Babylon and who it is, because once you see that mystery Babylon is Jerusalem, that proves that what the book is about is the destruction of mystery Babylon, and it's prophesying it before it happens. So to me, that is the strongest evidence showing the early writing of the book.
But now what happens if somebody said that, it is Jerusalem, and that's why Jerusalem's back in the land now, because they're the whore? Because I had one of my friends that's Hebrew roots. He believes that, it's Jerusalem, but it's the Jews over there now.
Right. I mean,
the
you
strongest.
I mean,
the
if
strongest.
you go ahead. Hey, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matthew. Go
No,
for it.
no, you go
All
first.
right. Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, their whole center point was the temple, and for it to not be mentioned, if the Bible was written or if Revelation was written in 95, and not to mention the destruction of the temple, that would be asinine, however you say that.
Yeah, agreed. I've actually heard that it's interesting that, you have the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all have, what's called the Olivet Discourse, which most scholars would say has to do partially with, the destruction of the temple in AD 70. But John excludes it, or whoever wrote John, whoever. That book doesn't even talk about it once. But what's interesting, Revelation could be that same author's rendition of that account in greater detail. So, then that is his, Olivet Discourse in a sense. But yeah, no, I agree with that,
Here's one of the strongest ones. I mean, there's like 5 parallels in Revelation and the Gospels, but this one is the one you would really want to use, because Revelation 18:24 says, "In her," speaking of Babylon, was found the blood of the prophets and the saints and all that were slain upon the earth. The parallel to that is when Jesus says in Matthew 23:35 that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias. So
As Revelation
literally
18,
telling him that you are going to be judged for all that blood that Revelation 18:24 is talking about.
Yeah, agreed.
So how is
Now,
that in the future, you know?
yeah, now, what would you say? I mean, because I have a theory of like what I had said in the book that I read about, the book of Ephesus or Ephesians being written, 50s, being all good, and then, like 8 years later, like it just falling apart.
It could fall apart in 6 months. That's a ridiculous argument.
Yeah.
It is so reaching. It's crazy. The church could fall apart in 2 weeks. I mean, it's so subjective, you know?
I guess, I mean, it just seems like, I don't know. Because I have, like, my theory is, which I agree, I mean, I do believe it fell away pretty quickly. But in the book of Acts, actually, there's, I think it's Acts 20, which talks about, so Acts 20:17 says, and sending to Ephesus from Miletus, he called the elders of the congregation. So this is, them at Ephesus. They're speaking to the elders, the prosperoses, so the elders. And then skipping to verse 28, says, then take heed to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit places you as overseers, to shepherd the congregation of God, which he purchased through his own blood. For I know this, that after my departure, grievous wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And out of you will rise up men speaking perverted things in order to draw away the disciples after themselves. So like right here, Paul's actually mentioning like, hey, right when we leave, when we dip out of here, some wolves are going to come in. So here's,
Right.
it's something that's happening quick. And here's like a proof for Revelation chapter 2 to show that. And that's what I was going to write in my little thing to the teacher, which, because I agree, like that, like, let me read you the next pointer that this book says. So after the Ephesians thing, which I believe the word, just answered right there, it says, Polycarp, writing in 110, it says, indicates that the church at Smyrna, 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 whatever, did not exist during the time of Paul's missionary journey in 50s and 60s in regard to the church at Laodicea. Paul meant, so I don't understand that claim. I guess the church in Revelation, how you have Smyrna. Let me see. Do you know where that one is off the top of your heads?
No, but they're all in 2 and 3.
Yeah, so there's got to be a church Smyrna or something.
And the other thing that you can do, I mean, the same verses you would use to prove preterism, you would also prove to or show that the book of Revelation was written early, like all these things will come upon this generation.
Yeah.
Are you trying to find the verse that says to the church of Smyrna?
Yeah.
Revelation 2:8, I think.
Yeah. So they're saying that a church father, Polycarp, writing in 110, indicates the church of Smyrna did not exist during that time period. I mean,
But you haven't actually seen the source that they're using for that paraphrase, correct?
correct. They're not quoting that at all. They're
Yeah.
just stating
I
that.
would surmise that you go there and that would be completely an interpretation.
Yeah, maybe it was called something different or something during that time. Then it says, in regard to the church at Laodicea, Paul mentions them 3 times in his Colossians letters in a positive light in about 60 to 62 AD. It hardly seems convincible that Laodiceans lapsed so quickly that the letter in Revelation 3:16 to 22 had nothing good with which to commend them in it, and was written, they're saying, in the early date, 64 AD. But again, like we just brought up before, things can change very quickly. You're talking about, 6 months. It can happen in one day.
Look how things changed very quickly in the Exodus. Everyone believed God. Everyone put blood on their doorpost. Everyone left Egypt. And then what happens? They turn right around and say, oh, you've left us out here to die in just a few days.
Yeah.
And then the Red Sea is parted. And then they go across the Red Sea and, oh, you've left us to die. We're just
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we don't have water. Oh, we don't have this. Oh, we don't have that. Oh, Moses has gone up there in what? In little as 40 days. He's dead now. Let's create God. In 40 days' time, look how Israel turned away. Why would we think that it would be any different?
Just look at Peter. He denies Christ 3 times. So,
Yeah.
I mean, people can change very quickly. You just hope that they come back around. But so that's, one of the arguments, which, like I said, I've heard before, and I thought it was pretty interesting until I saw that Acts chapter 20 thing, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. But, I think the Bible, obviously, it makes more sense that it being written earlier than, than in 90. Like what Rob said, it just doesn't make any sense that you have, like, because they're saying John's the one that wrote in 90. So you have the Gospel of John, you have the, his first, second, third letters of John, and then Revelation written in 90s. And not one time, not one remark does he say, oh yeah, that, the most amazing prophecy that Jesus gives about the destruction of the temple. Yeah, I'm not even going to mention it, that it happened. But it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the whole eschatology is based around, Matthew 24, basically. And then for people to say, oh, well, that happened, but they didn't even mention it. I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Make a good point there.
Yeah, because, a lot of people, will say, even, futurists, they'll be like, yeah, there are, there's a section in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, that's about 70 AD, but that's not the fulfillment of it. There's like partial, like some of it's fulfilled, but not all of it.
Right.
So even those scholars will say, yeah, it's written, so, those things are about the destruction of the temple in AD 70 that Jesus prophesied, and it came, to pass. But
what
then,
do
like
they say about the measurement of the temple in Revelation?
Yeah, chapter 11 is another one that I definitely point to, that, like, look, it's the temple's still there.
What do they say about that? How do they?
But again, it's a future thing.
The third temple?
Yeah, it's a temple that would be built, and sometime in the near
Gotcha.
future. That's
Yeah.
how they would say that.
Okay.
Which, I mean, you can't argue. I mean, you're like, okay, well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, so you just really, when you talk to people that, you know, I guess, really, you know, there's some debates that are out there that are really good about the dating of Revelation, but I would say it's, you know, especially for a preterist, they should, you know, have those go-to scriptures and then also hear the other side, because if somebody that really knows like the arguments, you know, that's all you have to do is just destroy that, you know, it being written in 70, or make it seem like it's not written in 70 and written in 90, then, you know, then preterism is like, you know, not, you know, real, I guess.
Holy grail of debunking preterism.
Yeah, I would say so. Even the Hebrew Roots church that I was going to for a little bit, they said the same thing, you know. I mean, I had told him that. I had said, yeah, if Revelation was written in 90, then yes, preterism is false. And then, you know, they're like, oh, well, it's written in 90. And then that's why I had said to him, I said, well, you're only getting that from the church, which is one person that, you know, is getting it from another person from another person. So it's not even like it's not even like a true witness to it. It's somebody writing 100 years later.
Well, think about just the way the Bible is written, the New Testament. All of a sudden, you have this 30-year gap. I mean, it's kind of odd, you know. It was going all together, and then
Yeah,
now
stop.
we just don't write anything, and then now we have a new prophecy 30 years out of the blue. Doesn't really quite make sense.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, you have all these books, you know, written like early, not early, but like I guess like 40s, 50s, 60s. The whole New Testament's done. Oh, except John, all the John writings.
How old is the oldest prophecy?
How old is the oldest prophecy?
Yes.
I guess Genesis chapter 3, maybe.
So how old is that? 1,000?
Well, it depends upon. I mean, the thing that I'm thinking about is that, you know, you'll bruise his heel, or, you know, you'll bruise his heel and he'll crush your head, or something like that.
From Adam to Christ is how many years?
Maybe like 4,000, 5,000. I'm not sure.
Yeah, 4,000 sounds right.
Something like that.
Okay.
I'd probably say a little more, but yeah.
2,000 to
Depends if
Abraham.
you go by Septuagint or not.
Yeah, the Septuagint. I'm definitely the Septuagint dating for sure.
Then I think it's like 5,500 years.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do Ezekiel.
I'm ready.
We're in chapter 6 then.
Yep. I'll read this chapter if someone wants to read someone else.
Yeah, I'll read.
Want to read 7?
Sure, why not?
Okay, I'll start with 6.
Are we gonna like stop? Or are we going straight through?
No, we'll stop.
Okay. I can share my screen so we can see the Bible. What version are you gonna read?
Lori.
I like the ESV, but you choose what you want.
Whatever
Whatever Rob puts up there, because I'm looking at his screen.
I'm going to use the ESV.
Sharing yet? There we go.
Okay, you ready?
No, it's not up yet.
I gotta do one other quick thing here. Whoops.
There it is.
Disconnect.
No, it
It
looks
is
good.
showing now?
Yep.
Okay.
Word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face towards the mountains of Israel and prophesy against them. And say, you mountains of Israel, hear the words of the Lord God. Thus says the Lord God to the mountains and the hills, to the ravines and the valleys. Behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. Your altars shall become desolate, and your incense altars shall be broken, and I will cast down your slain before your idols. And I will lay the dead bodies of the people of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones around your altars. Wherever you dwell in the city shall be waste, and the high places ruined, so that your altars will be waste and ruined, your idols broken and destroyed, your incense altars cut down, and your works wiped out. And the slain shall fall in your midst, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Yet I will leave some of you alive. When you have among the nations some who have escaped the sword, and when you are scattered through the countries, then those of you who escape will remember me among the nations where they are carried captive, how I have been broken over their whoring hearts, that they have departed from me, and over their eyes that go whoring after their idols. And they will be loathsome in their own sight for the evils that they have committed, for all their abominations. And they shall know that I am the Lord. I have not said in vain that I will do this evil to them. Thus says the Lord God, clap your hands and stamp your feet and say, alas, because of all the evil abominations of the house of Israel, for they shall fall by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. He who is far off shall die of pestilence, and he who is near shall fall by the sword, and he who is left and is preserved shall die of famine. Thus I will spend my fury upon them, and you shall know that I am the Lord, when their slain lie among their idols around their altars, on every high hill, on all the mountaintops, under every green tree, and under every leafy oak, wherever they offered pleasing aroma to all their idols. And I will stretch out my hand against them, and make the land desolate and waste in all their dwelling places, in the wilderness of Wilblah. Then they will know that I am the Lord.
Pretty fascinating. I remember when I first read this, I was like, whoa, wait a second. Not my first when I read this, but you got, who is he speaking to? The mountains of Israel?
Yeah, right.
And then you have the hills, the ravens, the valleys. I shall bring a sword on you, and I will destroy your high places. So here's this, talking, when you talk about heaven and earth, it's just kind of like a showing you that this language of physical, earth is actually talking about the land of Israel, the people.
When is this destruction coming? Any idea?
70 AD.
It is 70 AD?
I think so.
How do we know?
Because this is after the first exile.
Well,
You mean when it's written?
Mhm.
I thought this was written before Babylon captivity. Or is it written more in 400s?
Ezekiel is among the captives, so it's after.
When we read through 1 through 5, I think it was probably in either chapter 1 or 2, if you remember, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at that and we're like, well, this is obviously after the fact.
Did Ezekiel live?
And it parallels Revelation 6 with the opening of the seals, because you got the same famine, pestilence, and death.
Remember how we were saying that, Revelation capitulates, and in one of those capitulations, it's Ezekiel is bearing witness?
How many cities were destroyed in 70 AD? Because it says wherever you dwell. The cities shall be waste, and the high places ruined.
I think the Roman army came through a lot of cities, not just Jerusalem, but
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
It did. Tacitus, I think, writes about that.
What's that?
Tacitus, he's like Josephus.
It says Ezekiel grew up in Judea during the last years of the Hebrew independence and was deported to Babylon in 597 BC.
Yeah, and the destruction was like what, 597, 596, 593 or something like that. So yeah, he's definitely, like you guys were saying, he's writing after Nebuchadnezzar had already destroyed, the sanctuary, took all the, the stuff from the temple and everything.
Daniel.
So I don't know, you do got a point to that for sure. I mean, I think my biggest thing when I read this is definitely seeing the way God speaks through his prophet, indicating that, you have this language of physical things, earth, land, and things like that. And it's regarding to it's actually not referring to actual land at all. It's talking about the people of Israel. So the same thing when you look in the New Testament, it talks about heaven and earth. You have that earthly language there, which was, being shown like, hey, it could also refer to people, not just like the actual globe or flat, whatever. If that makes sense. I thought that was fascinating.
If you look at the end of chapter 6, where it says, and I will stretch out my hand against them and make the land desolate and waste. If you look at Matthew 23:38, and most people think, well, I mean, if you really look at the internal evidence, 23 and 24 deal with 70 AD as well. Mm-hmm. It says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who sent her. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling. Look, your house is left to you desolate."
That was Matthew what?
23:38. And in Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 14, it says, I will make the land desolate. I wonder if there's any wordplay on Ribla or Dibla.
The Ribla or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see what comes up under the dictionary. Nothing under Tories. Try Easton. Okay. Fruitful and ancient town on the northern frontier of Palestine, 35 miles northeast of Baalbek, wherever that is, and 10 or 12 south of the Lake Homs, the eastern bank. It says Nebuchadnezzar had his headquarters in his campaign against Jerusalem, and here also Necho fixed his camp after he had routed Josiah's army at Megiddo. It was on the Great Caravan Road from Palestine to Carchemish on the Euphrates. It's described in Numbers 34:11 as on the eastern side of Ai, a place called the Fountain. I'm surprised that Ezekiel 6:14 cross-reference doesn't mention Matthew 23:38 like you said, Stacy. I mean, it seems like a natural fit.
Because what they look at, I think, is that, okay, so this is after the first exile, so that must obviously mean that Ezekiel has to prophesy this about his time and his day. So obviously, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't finished, and he would have to go back and do it all again. And because they have that understanding, and so they're not looking at Ezekiel actually prophesying about the true destruction that will end the nation of Israel. So it's kind of like God saying, so you think this is your exile, this is your destruction of you being carried away by the Babylonians? This is what your destruction is going to be. And
Yeah.
we were talking the other night about Ezekiel. What I was looking at, each chapter, it's like a different vision. And at some points, it was like Ezekiel is like playing an actor. He has to play a role, and he's doing an act to show out things. And in some instances, he's acting like or portraying Christ, being Son of Man. And other times, he's acting like the nation of Israel itself and the destruction that's going to come upon them. So when I look at Ezekiel now, when I see a vision or a word of the Lord that comes to him, I have to first ask myself, okay, who is Ezekiel acting or portraying now? And I think, me personally, that's a key to looking at Ezekiel, because he plays many different roles. He's not always the same role.
What's this Chaldeans thing here, though? When did that take place?
Chaldean stuff and talking about Babylon, that's got to be back when Nebuchadnezzar was king.
Yeah, but he was king during Ezekiel's time.
Okay.
And it says, and when they had taken, they brought him up to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, at Riblah in the land of Hamath, and he passed sentence on him. So I guess it doesn't really talk about destruction on Riblah.
No,
Kind of need a map.
It's not really talking about the destruction of Riblah. It was just saying that's where the judgment was passed on the dude that they captured.
Come on, Matthew, let me hear some of that covenantal land.
I don't know if I have anything now. I'm a little bit tired. Kind of like fading in and out, honestly.
I mean, I think just it talking about, calling it land, but it's talking about people, that's covenantal. You have that, the old covenant people were actually spoken as being mountain and things like that.
At the beginning, it's talking about the mountains and the hills, and those are actually people. So at the very end, where it says, I will make your land desolate, that really, the land itself actually could be referring to the people as well. Because the Pharisees were desolate.
I know, like when you
So I guess it's north of Israel then, or
Yep.
Now,
That's
I
all.
do know, doesn't Ezekiel also write to the northern house of Israel as well? I think he does in some places.
Would you say this is pretty important for, preterism in the sense that if he is, so he's not talking about the destruction
Well,
of the
remember
first temple?
in the previous chapter, he talks about, he says, this is Jerusalem. That's when the city, Ezekiel is told to cut his hair off, divide it in three. And that parallels in Revelation when the city is divided into three. But in Ezekiel, it literally says, this is Jerusalem. So it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. The only question is it 70 AD destruction or is it some future destruction? And I would have to ask the futurist, like, why are you waiting? I thought you were waiting for the salvation of Israel in the future. Why are you waiting for its destruction?
Didn't we read where it said that it would never happen again? Do you remember that?
Right.
Yeah.
Never was, never will be again.
Right. And in this chapter, it talks about the remnant being scattered to the nations. This is not the end of time.
Mhm.
It's the scattering in 70 AD.
So would you consider this pretty
that's when
parallel to
Daniel
Daniel?
says is, as I say, that's when Daniel says the end of time is, though, Matthew.
The end of what time? It's the end of an age.
That's
It's
it.
not the end of time.
We need
Yeah.
to pull that verse up. If you remember what chapter it was, is it 2 or 3?
The one in Daniel?
The one in Ezekiel. Remember when we had saw that?
Which verse you mean?
Never was, we never will be again.
Oh.
Yeah, that. Do you remember that? And you said, Stacy, you got a good point there for the futurist.
Right, because it's not the end of time. I'm scrolling through 5.
It's certainly one to be remembered.
I mean, I know a lot of people read this stuff and say it's about the end. Like all these things.
This clearly shows there's time after that.
Like Ezekiel 5:9 maybe. And because of all your abominations I'll do with you what I have never yet done, and like of which I'll never do again.
Right.
Right. That's it. So it can't be the end of time like the futurists are saying, because there would be no point to say and never would do again if that's the end of history itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree.
And you can't say, well, if there's a future judgment coming, if you look at Ezekiel and say, well, that judgment's already taken place, then you're saying, well, the coming judgment that's supposed to end all the world and everything is not going to be as grand or as severe as the judgment that took place in Ezekiel. So either way, the futurists lose.
Yeah. I mean, I know the ending of Ezekiel is a confusion, between a lot of believers anyways.
That's right. But we haven't looked at it yet with our covenantal lens that we just built.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting, especially that you guys have brought up. It's like, yeah, Jerusalem's already destroyed.
I never really saw that until we looked at it the other night.
Like I know there's a verse that I have written down. Let me go. Hold on. One of my little notes.
I mean, when would that Ezekiel 5:9? When would other people say that was or is?
I think they glossed over that.
Can you put that back up on your screen, Rob?
Yeah, just a sec.
Yeah, the futurists would have to say it hasn't happened yet. But that doesn't make any sense, even to their doctrine.
Yeah, but aren't they waiting for the destruction of Jerusalem?
Yeah, but they're supposed to also be waiting for the kingdom of Israel to happen and the gathering of Israel from the nations. So it's kind of like a mixed message.
Their understanding of judgment is that basically ends history.
But they would say that the gathering's already like that part's already like I guess happened and happening.
Yeah.
Right, and then 1/3 of that gathering is going to perish.
Yeah, they're all gonna die. Yeah, then you have to show you in a 2 Chronicles 30. This is kind of just to show like that the temple was already destroyed. 2 Chronicles 36:17. Jerusalem is captured and burned. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and who had no compassion on young men or virgin, old men and age. He gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great, small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burned the house of God, and broke down the wall of Jerusalem, and burned all its places with fire, and destroyed all its precious vessels. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword. So just showing you, like, hey, like, you know.
After that, then Ezekiel.
Yeah. Now, after this has happened, Ezekiel is talking about Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. But I have heard that there were still, like, it wasn't 100% like.
They're only getting that from their interpretation of Ezekiel, because they believe that a prophet has to prophesy of something that will occur in his lifetime, even if it is only a foreshadow.
Yeah, maybe.
But Ezekiel 5:9 kind of tells you this is not a foreshadow. Because the shadow can't be greater than the event itself.
His prophetic call came to him in the 5th year of Jehoiakim's captivity, 594 BC. So when was the
It was first besieged in 586 by Babylon.
586?
By Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
Yep. Which is shortly after this prophetic call.
Would you say, okay, so let's entertain the idea that there were multiple judgments in this period, like people like to hold. Say that the first carrying away that Nebuchadnezzar did was the greater event, Or did he just take a few people and barely destroy the city and then did it later? Which of the multiple invasions and exiles within this period do you think was the greatest? Wouldn't it have been the first?
Definitely would have been the second. And if you look at the statue, in Daniel 2, it's Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, then Rome. Obviously, there's a series of takeovers of Jerusalem by Gentile nations, culminating with 70 AD. Feet of iron and clay. If that were true, like the futurists would have to overlook 70 AD. They would have to say, well, this happened in 586, but it's going to happen again future from now. And they would have to totally overlook 70 AD unless they would have 3 destructions.
Yeah, then that's just getting ridiculous, isn't it? It's like, all right, so is this God's plan for everything?
Well, that's what most people believe.
He's just
Well, I
gonna,
think the later
messing
part
it
of
up.
Ezekiel talks about 70 AD. I think the first part's talking about 586.
Which part in the first? Which chapters do you think, Rob?
I don't think he starts talking to I think chapter 36 or 33, something like that, till he starts
Yeah,
talking
but
about
how do you
70 AD.
justify the scripture?
The 5:9.
Well, no, never will be, and never will be, or never was, and never will be again.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, that one has to be 70 AD. But the first one, that's not talking never will be again. That's not Nebuchadnezzar's. It seems like to me the plan was, all right, you're gonna do it, you're gonna mess up, I'm gonna give you a second chance, you're gonna mess that one up, and then that's it. Finito. We're not gonna do third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 7, 25 times, right?
Well, because we haven't gotten there yet, but in Ezekiel 9, 10, and 11, you'll read about the Spirit leaving the temple, and Spirit never comes back until Christ himself appears to the temple.
Wait a second. So in chapter 9, the temple's still there?
Yeah.
So then he is talking about, then which temple? Then what temple, I guess?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I was just reading in my Hebrew Roots version that they were saying that Jeremiah had already prophesied about the destruction, and Ezekiel's kind of the second witness, saying yep, it's over.
Right.
But maybe, I guess maybe you could have kind of a dual thing.
Looks
in a
like
sense.
Ezekiel 25 talks about the son of David to reign over them.
And when Jeremiah prophesied, this was before the first or the Nebuchadnezzar exile, wasn't it?
Yeah, he prophesied I think it's I'm not sure when he wrote, but he's talking about the destruction as well.
Yeah, that's isn't
Although it says that in 2:8 through 3:3, Ezekiel was the Lord's watchman, and he would forfeit his own life if he did not alarm the cry. Well, why would he alarm a cry to nobody if it's talking about 70 AD?
If you look at Jeremiah 1:14, or basically 1:13, it says, "The word of the Lord came to me again. What did you see? I see a pot that is boiling." I answered, "It is tilting towards us from the north." The Lord said to me, "From the north, disaster will be poured out on all who live in the land. I am about to summon all the peoples of the northern kingdoms, declared the Lord." So this was clearly the the first judgment.
Yeah, I mean, here it says, Son of man, eat whatever you find here, eat this scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel. It's kind of the argument that we use for preterism. Who was he speaking to? Ezekiel was not speaking to the first century believers. He was talking to the house of Israel during his time.
Right.
And don't forget, Jeremiah was warning the nation about the 70 years of captivity. That's what Daniel was reading when he prayed for the answer that he got in Daniel 9.
Yeah. And according
It
to Rob
says,
Boyd, Jeremiah is the one that hid the Ark of the Covenant so nobody could find it.
so this says, I'll just read this. It says, the Ezekiel book is divided into 3 parts. Denunciation of Judah and Israel, Ezekiel 1 through 24, dated 593 to 588 BC. Oracles against foreign nations, chapters 25 through 32, dated 587 to 571. And the future restoration of Israel, chapters 33 through 48, dated 585 to 573. You know, I don't know. I think
What commentary is that, Rob?
it's not a commentary; it's a dictionary.
But
Yeah, it
but
doesn't
I
mention the destruction of Jerusalem. It talks about the destruction of other nations and totally glosses over Israel's
No,
own,
it says
right?
it's talking about the destruction coming as well. It's saying that chapters 1 through 24 are written before 586.
what I propose is that if you look at Ezekiel with a covenantal lens, and you automatically already see that when he says prophesy to the mountains and to the hills, but yet he's actually talking to Israel, that when it's actually mentioning these other nations, that also is talking to Israel. I'd always thought, when the prophet was prophesying to these other nations, that meant these literal other nations. But if I'm looking at it with a covenantal lens, I see that, because I looked at Zechariah the other day, and it was saying that these nations will mourn if Israel's enemies, Israel destroyed, they're not going to mourn over Israel.
Well, I don't know. I guess now, like, what Rob was saying, I'm looking even at my, I guess, ESV study book Bible thing. And, they do have chapters like 1 through, even 8 and 9. It's, 593, 592. So that is, the temple is still there.
I mean, like here, Ezekiel 3:16, who's he warning?
So Nebuchadnezzar, the king over, pretty much considering himself the king over all the world, comes and invades Jerusalem and decides to take some people off, but just leave the temple and all of its gold and all of its things that later he ends up getting because his son uses, but we don't know when that is, but he decides to just leave that there.
There was 3 sieges though.
Right. So the first siege that Nebuchadnezzar came in, that great king,
which was like in like 600, right? Or what year was that? When did Daniel go to Babylon?
I think it was 605.
Yeah, 600.
First, the greatest. All right, so he actually takes the nobility of the nation and takes them out so that he can train them as his diplomat. So he takes the nobility of the nation, but yet he leaves this great temple there in existence.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, 605 is the first exile.
At this point, to defeat the people, not only would he take the nobility away from them, but he would also lay destruction to their temple, which is the thing that they revered most. That would be.
Did Nebuchadnezzar have a change of heart? I thought Nebuchadnezzar had a change of heart eventually.
Yeah, that was after though.
Right.
And Daniel's, But the thing is, I mean, let me see here.
Because wasn't it burned down then too?
Yeah, they destroyed it. I even read that in Second Chronicles. They do destroy it, but that's not in 605. It's later in 580.
586,
And that's why they have
587, yeah.
they have the dating in Ezekiel, because he's writing during the same during that same time, warning them, not warning them, but saying like, hey, it's coming.
It says warning right in Ezekiel 3:17. You shall
Yeah.
give them warning from me. So I mean, he's definitely warning him. He was made a watchman, it says. So I don't see how we can be putting this in 70 AD when he's warning them, not the first century believers. I mean, you can definitely maybe say things are kind of double fulfillment, but I don't know if that's actually the case here.
Well, it can't really be a fulfillment because of 5:9. I mean, that's a looming thing right there in front of us.
Yeah, I think things on those, there's lots of language like that gets used that we can't really say just because it says that actually means that literally to a fact. It can be what's that word? Not euphemism, but I'm trying to think of a word, but it's just a saying more than a literal.
If it's hyperbole, then I mean, we really can't take. We pretty much have to take everything with a grain of salt.
And now look at this too. The next chapter, verse 7, talks about that the day of tumult or whatever, I can't say that word, is near. So there's something that's near. The day is coming. The time has come. So something's about to happen, right? And then you get to Ezekiel 11.
Should I read 7?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to switch to the King James. All right. So moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Also, thou son of man, thus saith the Lord God unto the land of Israel, the end is come upon the four corners of the land. Now is the end come upon thee, and I will send mine anger upon thee, and will judge thee according to thy ways, and I will recompense thee all thine abominations. And mine eye shall not spare thee, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense thy ways upon thee, and thine abomination shall be in the midst of thee, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Thus saith the Lord God, and evil, and only evil, behold, is come, and an end is come, the end is come, it watches for thee, behold, it is come. The morning is come unto thee, O thou that dwellest in the land, the time is come, the day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again of the mountains. Now I will shortly pour out my fury upon thee, and accomplish my anger upon thee, and I will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense thee for all thine abominations. And my eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. I will recompense thee according to thy ways and thine abominations that are in the midst of thee. And ye shall know that I am the Lord that smiteth. Behold, it is come. The morning is gone forth, the rod hath blossomed, pride hath budded. Violence is risen up into a rod of wickedness. None of them shall remain, nor their multitude, nor any of theirs, neither shall there be wailing for them. The time is come, the day draweth near. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. For the seller shall not return to that which is sold, although they were yet alive, for the vision is touching the whole multitude thereof, which shall not return, neither shall any strengthen himself in the iniquity of his life. They have blown the trumpet, even to make all ready, but none goeth to the battle, for my wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. The sword is without, and the pestilence and the famine within. He that is in the field shall die with the sword, and he that is in the city, famine and pestilence shall devour him. But they that escape of them shall escape, and shall be on the mount like doves of the battle, all the morning, every one for his iniquity. And all the hands shall be feeble, and all the knees shall be weak as water. They shall also gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all the faces, and baldness upon all their heads. They shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels, because it is a stumbling block of their iniquity. As for the beauty of his ornament, he set it in majesty, but they have made the images of their abominations and of their detestable things therein. Therefore I have set it afar for them. And I will give it into their hands of the strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. My face will I turn also from them, and they shall pollute my secret place. For the robber shall enter into it and defile it. Make a chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. Wherefore I will bring the worst of the heathen, and they shall possess their houses, and I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace, and there shall be none. Mischief shall come upon mischief, and rumor shall be upon rumor. They shall seek a vision of the prophet, but the law shall perish from the priest, and the counsel from the ancients. The king shall mourn, and the prince shall be clothed with desolation, and the hands of the people of the land shall be troubled. I will do unto them after their way, according to their deserts I will judge them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. I don't know if that's deserts or deserts.
So yeah, I think, that whole chapter is like pretty something's about to happen. So either that, near and coming soon really is, 500 years.
Well, it does talk about, behold the day, behold it comes. So this is the day of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're happy to say, well, then there's multiple days of the Lord. So there can even be in the future, or this is the great day of the Lord.
Yeah.
I don't see where it says day of the Lord, but I think definitely people think there are multiple day of the Lords. But I mean, this was coming shortly. I don't think, that's kind of like us taking full preterism and saying, okay, it's coming shortly, but then for them to say shortly, it didn't mean shortly for them.
Well, it does refer to shortly, I think, in Amos, where it talks about the restoration. And then James actually quotes Amos, referring to that. And Joel also, is quoted by Peter in Acts chapter 2. And, this was like about a 400-year time frame. So I don't think 400 years is necessarily not short. I know that 1,500 years from...
Well, this would be 600 years, though, because from 590 to 70
Yeah,
AD
to 70,
would be 600.
yeah.
That would be 600 years.
But what's interesting is I actually wrote this huge thing down in one of my little notes here, and it's actually referring to Ezekiel chapter 7, talking about the day is near, right? And then you have the destruction of Babylon. And then if you look at Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 2, it says, and he said to me, son of man, these are the men who devise iniquity and who give wicked counsel in the city, who say the time is not near to build houses. This city is a cauldron, and we are the meat. So this is showing that the false prophets are again saying that the time of the exile will not be long. It will be short. So I guess this time being near, it's actually, hold on.
Okay, so that could also, if if you're looking at near of this is an imminent thing, then you could also look at Daniel as the same way. Because why would you say that Daniel is referring to 80, 70s destruction and the judgment in Daniel 12, but yet,
I mean,
Well, the Daniel 12 actually says it's not now. It says, shut the book, for the time is not now. And then it's 600 years. And then you have what you're saying right now is 600 years is near. So right there would show you that if Ezekiel chapter 7 really is referring to 70 AD, that's 600 years saying it's near. Daniel chapter 12 says, hey, the time is not near. Shut the book until the time of the end. Which, if that's referring to 70 AD, that's 600 years. So,
well,
you know,
also,
you got.
I mean, in Ezekiel 7:24, it says, the enemy will come and possess your houses. Well, in Isaiah, when it talks about 70 AD, it says that Israel will possess the houses afterwards, not the heathen. So it's total opposite of who's going to possess the houses. I mean, I agree. Definitely, the language is comparable to 70 AD, but I don't think that's the intended message. But I also think it's interesting. I've went to churches before. They say, "Oh, in the very end times, people are going to throw their money out in the streets," and so apparently they took that out of context because this was back in 586. It looks like when they did that.
So when it says, behold, this is your end, now the end is upon you. Would that be the ending of the nation?
I think it does have an end, and then when we get later into Ezekiel, we're going to see the restoration of Israel.
Yeah, like I have more in it's another kind of interesting thing in Ezekiel chapter 12, because you have, you know, God telling Ezekiel that the time is near, but you have the false prophets of Israel saying that the time is not near. And starting in Ezekiel 12:21, it says, and the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, what is this proverb that you have about the land of Israel, saying, the days grow long, and every vision comes to nothing? Tell them, therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will put an end to this proverb, and they shall no more use it as a proverb in Israel, but say to them, the days are near, and the fulfillment of every vision. For there shall no more any false vision or flattering divination within the house of Israel. For I am the Lord. I will speak the word that I will speak, and and it will be performed. It will no longer be delayed. But in your days, O rebellious house, I will speak the word and perform it, declares the Lord. And the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, behold, they of the house of Israel say, the vision that he sees is for many days from now, and he prophesies of times far off. Therefore, say to them, thus says the Lord God, none of my words will be delayed any longer, but the word that I speak will be performed, declares the Lord God. So I think that definitely goes and shows, like, hey, God's saying it's near, but the false prophets of Israel are saying, hey, you know, what Ezekiel's saying is not true. It's for many days off. But God's saying, no, it's going to happen. So
if I can get like a brief overview, Nebuchadnezzar came in He took the nobility out, but he left the temple.
Well, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar himself probably didn't go in.
Right, but his armies went in. They took the nobility out, but they left the temple there.
Yeah.
And then we have to take that, this destruction is going to happen on you. And it's something that I'm going to do that I will never do again, is not to be really taken for what it says. It's just hyperbole. And I mean, which sounds, this language sounds so similar to the language of the destruction of AD 70. But, which one is greater?
Well, I would
I don't
obviously
think
say
you have to determine which one's greater. It's just meaning that there's great destruction coming.
Well, the thing is, with the destruction of AD 70, it also says this will never happen again. So we have to say.
I think that the greater one.
We have the destruction in Ezekiel's time, and we have the destruction of AD 70, and both say this is something that I will do that I will never do again.
Well, if you think about it, one of them has to do with the destruction of the temple and then bringing them back, which he only did once. That never happened again. And then the second destruction, he destroyed them for good, which was actually the greater one, which was, what Jesus is quoting, saying that, the Great Tribulation. So in a sense, they both have that element of something that God's going to do, which he'll never do again. Because like with Assyria, in 130, 150 years before this, or however long, the Assyrians came in and took the northern house of Israel, where Judah still stayed there. Then Nebuchadnezzar comes in, sacks Jerusalem, destroys it, 586, and then you have people coming back to the land, rebuilding the land. Ezra, Nehemiah, all that, Zerubbabel, all that kind of stuff goes down. They build the walls, they build the temple, they start doing the sacrifices again, and then the temple gets built, and then you have 400 years later, you have Yeshua coming, and and then the destruction is
much more terrible stuff happening in 70 AD. Like none of that stuff even comes close to like what Nebuchadnezzar.
I think there was more torture type stuff in the 70 AD.
Well, I mean, people were eating their children. Like that stuff wasn't happening in Nebuchadnezzar's thing. Like,
well, it did say famine though in 7.
The king of Jerusalem was taken out by a nose ring held on a chain, and that king was blinded. But before he was blinded, he was told, your last vision is going to be the sons of yours are going to be slain, and that is the last thing you are going to see. And then he's blinded. So,
are you talking about Nebuchadnezzar, or who are you talking about?
I think so. So this is not as good, or this is something that's not as judgmental or evil as what the Romans did.
Yeah, I would say definitely there was more torture and more death in 70 AD, but I think maybe we have to look at it as it was greater in 70 AD and as in number of deaths probably as well.
Well, the thing is that my understanding of torture is if a nation exists, you're going to torture its citizens so that they will capitulate or submit to your rule. But in Rome, what did they do? They destroyed the nation of Israel. So I can't see the reason why the Romans would come in and torture, because they basically just wanted to obliterate and wipe out the nation, which they did.
I mean, you could definitely see there's comparisons between, even the language in Ezekiel sounds very, I can see, the point making it, 70 AD. I mean, I would say definitely the greatness of the 70 AD had to do with because God was divorcing Israel. He didn't divorce them in 586. He didn't divorce them.
Right, but he destroyed them.
Yeah.
So
he
that
sca-
destruction,
he
as
just
he says, though, that destruction he would never do as clearly
He
as
didn't
he
say
did.
necessarily as great though, or greater. He just said the.
Would
he
never
says, and
do
I
it.
will do
So
it. And he
destroy
says, and I
Israel.
will do it in you, and that which has not been done, and which will not do the like again, for all
So
your abominations.
70, he didn't really destroy the whole nation like he did in Ezekiel's time.
No, see, the thing is actually in Ezekiel's time, he left a remnant after the fact. Daniel, Ezekiel, these people are your remnant after the destruction. But in 70 AD, it's over. There is no more Judah. Judah's done. She's divorced. Because you have in Jeremiah chapter 3, you have the divorcing of the northern house of Israel, but he keeps Judah, even though he does say that she played the harlot too. But, again, there was prophecy to be fulfilled, so he couldn't just divorce Judah. But he keeps a remnant. They go in, Babylon, gets destroyed for this, they didn't follow the Sabbath years. So for 70 years, they had to, for every 70 Shemitah or Jubilee or however, they have to do 70 years of captivity until the time is up. So it just makes sense.
Check this verse out, Albert. It says they would eat their children in the first time too.
Oh yeah, where's that?
Yeah, because it said famine in chapter 7.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 5, it says the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers.
Wow. Okay. So, okay.
So
Yeah, when we were
that's
looking
pretty
at that,
interesting.
we remember that did occur in 70 AD for sure.
Yeah, that too, for sure. Yeah.
So then you have to say, well, it happened twice or it happened once.
Right.
Or it's hyperbole.
So the thing is I'm looking in 2 Kings, because I know at the end of it talks about Nebuchadnezzar and things like that. So I'm trying to see how many times it actually mentions him sieging. Because, it mentions multiple times in chapter 24.
That would be great.
So it says, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim was a servant of him 3 years, and he turned and rebelled against him, and Yahweh sent against him troops of the Chaldeans, and the troops of Syria, and the troops of Moab, and the troops of the Amorites, or whatever. Hold on. So I know it says here in verse 10, and it says, at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants laid siege to it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, and his mother, and his servants, and his leaders, and his eunuchs. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he brought out from all the treasures of the house of Yahweh, and all the treasures of the house of the king, and he cut in pieces all the vessels of gold of Solomon and the king of Israel. He made in the temple of Yahweh as Yahweh had spoken, and he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the leaders, and all the mighty men of valor, and 1,000 captives, and the craftsmen, and all that kind of stuff. Hold on. And he exiled Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his eunuchs, and the mighty ones of the land. And he caused a captivity to go from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of valor were 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths 1,000. All were mighty men warriors. The king of Babylon brought them into captivity to Babylon. The king of Babylon made Mattaiah, the brother of the father, to reign in his place, and he turned his name into Zedekiah. Zedekiah was a son of 21 years when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. So right here shows you that you have, Nebuchadnezzar set up another king to reign over Israel. So Jerusalem's still there.
All the furniture from the temple was removed, right?
It says the treasure of the house of Yahweh and the treasures of the house of the king were cut into pieces, and all the vessels of gold that Solomon, the king Israel, made. I mean, that very well could be, but because the next chapter goes in more detail of the actual burning of the city. But this just goes and shows you that
Chapter 8 or chapter 25?
This is chapter 25. So, so right there, Stacy, can you see that Nebuchadnezzar goes in there, carries away the king and all so I guess this is when Daniel's taken into captivity.
Right.
What we just read. And
I can see that.
We'll just keep reading. So it says, 18 says, Zedekiah was the son of 21 years when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years, and the name of his mother was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did evil in the eyes of Yah, according to all that Jehoiakim did, for through the anger of Yahweh it happened in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his face, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And it happened in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, and camped against it, and built a siege, and mounted all around. So, here's another
where
siege.
Are you at? Where do you
Second
find
Kings
that
25:1. So
Oh,
here's
okay.
a second siege, and then verse 2. And the city entered into the siege until the 11th year of the king of Zedekiah, on the 9th of the month, when the famine was severe in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. Then the city was broken into, and by night all the men of war went by way of the gate between the two walls by the king's garden, and the Chaldeans were against the city all around, and the king went the way towards the Arabah, and the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in Arabah of Jericho, and all his armies were scattered from him. And they seized the king and brought him to the king of Babylon, to Rabbah. That's the same place as before we were talking about. And they gave judgment on him. And they killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and blinded Zedekiah's eyes, and bound him with bronze feeders, and caused him to go to Babylon. And in the 5th month, on the 7th of the month, it was the 9th year of King Nebuchadnezzar's, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, the chief of the executioners, the servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of Yahweh, and the king's house, and all the houses in Jerusalem. Yeah, he burned every great house with fire, and all the armies of the Chaldeans, who were, the chief of the executioners, broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. The rest of the people, those left in the city, and those that had fallen away, that fell to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude, Nebuchadnezzar, the chief of the executioners, exiled. But the chief of the executioners left of the poorest of the land for the vine dressers and the farmers. And so there are people still there, according to this. And the bronze pillars of the house of Yahweh, and the bases, and the bronze sea, and the house of Yahweh, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and lifted up its bronze to Babylon.
Okay, so then basically we just look at Ezekiel as just a portion of history and a local prophecy.
Yeah, like what I brought up before about, Ezekiel saying in chapter 7, like, hey, this is near, this is about to happen. But then in chapter 12, the false prophets, the false people, just like they did in Jeremiah's day, God said that, you're going to be captives for 70 years, but they're pretty much, saying, oh, it's only going to be a short period. It's not going to be a long time, but, 70 years was, will be a long time kind of. And then you have in Ezekiel chapter 12, again, like what I read, you have, them saying, oh, what Jeremiah is saying is not going to come to pass. And then, God says through Ezekiel, say, hey, no, none of my words will be delayed any longer, but the words that I speak will be performed. And if Ezekiel 12 was written in around like 588 or 590 something, he only got like 6 years till 596, 6 years, 8 years, and then boom, the destruction happened.
Okay, so
here's
prophetorial ministry, he talks about an immediate destruction that's going to take his lifetime, and then some point other in the mentioning after chapter 40 of the temple, this never came to pass because it was conditional, or this is something that was later on after his lifetime that was not near.
I mean, the Ezekiel temple could be taken both ways. Could be taking, especially reading it in the Masoretic text, taking it as a conditional covenant that this was supposed to be the second temple, but because Israel did not repent and they did not, do what he said, then they did not get that temple. Or you can take it as that's all spiritual, because you have the temple in Ezekiel chapter 37, and 36 you have the water coming to life, 37 the valley of dry bones, and at the end of that chapter when Israel gets gathered, because remember, this is the beginning of Ezekiel talking about the destruction is going to happen, it's going to be severe and all this stuff, but then in the end he's saying that they're going to come back to this land.
Well, there's some cutoff point between the immediate prophecies of Ezekiel versus what you would clearly say Ezekiel chapter 36 and 37 are during the time of Christ.
Yeah.
So somewhere there is some cutoff where he's saying, okay, this is immediate prophecy, and now the prophecies that I'm doing is not near, far off.
Well, I think where I got it from, Don Preston is in one of the books that I had from him. He kind of goes over there's a lot of places that talk about it's near, it's going to happen, but it's I want to get his, but I don't want to quote him wrong. I don't know where I put the book at though.
But all I'm looking at is that there's a cutoff point in some chapter, which we haven't really determined yet, that all of these prophecies are within Ezekiel's lifetime, and then the prophecies from that point on are not near.
Well, because we're reading it after the fact, so we obviously know that when, some of these things did not happen the way that it says it's supposed to happen. So, like, when you look at, a lot of people can see, like, there are partial preterists. What's his name? Like, Gary DeMar, I think his name is. He'll take Ezekiel and say all of it has to do, like, the valley of dry bones, that's Israel coming back to the land, during Nehemiah and Ezra's time. That has nothing to do about, first century.
Here's a verse for you, Stacy. Ezekiel 24:24. It says, "Thus Ezekiel is unto."
Because it's significant, right?
Right, exactly.
That's cool.
So, thus Ezekiel is unto you a sign according to all he hath done, shall ye do. And when this cometh, ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. So he was telling the people, listen to Ezekiel, do all that Ezekiel tells you to do. And when this cometh on you, you shall know that I am the Lord God.
Can you read that one more time?
Yeah. Thus Ezekiel as unto you a sign, according to all that he hath done, shall ye do. And when this cometh, ye shall know that I am the Lord God.
Okay.
So I think we got the same thing going on with full preterism. Audience relevance is important here. But yeah, I think that the division is going to be sometime in between 25 and 32. And then we're going to find some type of division somewhere in there where it may not be a hardcore like.
Yeah, I would like to find where that line is.
It would be interesting to know.
I
Right.
did find the quote that I wanted to just say. So, talking about, because in this book that I have, Can God Tell Time? Don Preston has a chapter listed under, but what about the Old Testament predictions of the day of the Lord? I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to literally read like one sentence pretty much. He says, the fact is that the Old Testament writers never, let me repeat that, never said that the end of the age, day of the Lord, was near. How do I know this? Because the inspired writers tell me so. Please read the following. And then he quotes of the salvation of the prophet. Wow, he actually doesn't even quote that. I think that's Peter, chapter 1, 1 Peter, talking about of the salvation that the prophets have inquired and searched carefully, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ, who was in them, was indicating when he testified before the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. To them it was revealed that not to themselves, but to us, they were ministering the things which now have been reported to you through those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, these things which angels desire to look into. Yeah, so that's Peter, chapter 1. So what was interesting is...
That was not in their lifetime.
Say that again?
It just says that was not in their lifetime. But it doesn't really actually give a time statement of, not near.
No, I mean, it's a pretty lengthy chapter. I don't want to read the whole thing, but, because like what we just read here, there are many times where it talks about like the day is near, the time for the destruction has come upon you. So people that are futurists will read that and be like, oh, that's, obviously for us, the destruction, that's for us. But, what Don Preston's saying is that the end of the age, when you read that phrase, which is found, there are places in the Old Testament that say that the end of the age, and then the New Testament talks about the end of the age, things like that. Right, that was near, because that's the, what the quote unquote, the end of time destruction, if you want to say.
So near can be 40 years.
Yeah, near can be a long time, yeah. Like 40 years, could probably be a couple hundred years.
Well, I know that not near, not close is 1500. I know that.
Yeah.
And the way that I see near as 40 years, I can see that. I would like to see where the line is between how the Bible determines not near versus near in a time frame.
Yeah, I mean, like what I was saying before. So if we took Ezekiel chapter 7 and said, okay, that this destruction, this stuff that's about to happen, this is referring to 70 AD. Let's just say that, So the Bible clearly says from when Ezekiel said this to 70 AD was near, which is 600 years. Remember, because he wrote this in like 590 something right? So 590 to 70 AD, 600 plus years, right? Would you agree?
Well, yeah, but what I would say is, though, dating is pretty relative because we have no idea. I mean, we have debates on the dating of Revelation, we just talked about. So, but obviously it was before Christ,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would. I mean, he's definitely talking about Babylon, so we know he can't be talking, 400 BC because Babylon's already gone.
The destruction in Ezekiel 7 is this. This really isn't really even a foreshadow. This is just talking about the immediate destruction that takes place. So
yeah, all it is, what I see is like he's saying.
Looking at this as a foreshadow. I mean, this is just talking about the first period of exile that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians did to Jerusalem. So this is just basically a period of history of the Bible, and it really, there is no foreshadow to this.
I mean, it's like reading Isaiah chapter 11. That's the destruction of Babylon. Most people will read that and talk about, oh, that's, because it mentions the heaven and the stars and the earth shaking and all that stuff, that has to do with, Revelation in Isaiah chapter 13, where it talks about, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel and with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land waste, and he shall destroy its sinners out of it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations shall not give light. The sun shall be darkened, and its going forth, and the moon shall not reflect its light. I will visit evil of the world and their iniquity on the wicked, and I will cause the arrogance and the proud to cease, and I will humble the pride of the tyrants. And I will make a man more rare than fine gold, even a man more than the carvings of Orpha. So I shall shake the heavens, and the earth shall move out of its place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. So people read that in Isaiah chapter 13, verses 9 to 13, and they're like, oh, that's obviously referring to Matthew chapter 24, Revelation chapter 19, and all that other stuff. But in reality, this had to do with Babylon being destroyed by the Medes and the Persians, because in verse 17 of Isaiah 13 says, behold, I stir up the Medes against them, who shall not value silver, they shall not delight in gold, and bows shall also smash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare sons. And Babylon, the glory of the kings, the beauty of the pride of the Chaldeans, shall be as when Elohim overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So, and we know in Daniel chapter 5 that the Medes were destroyed. Babylon was taken over by the Medes in one day, one night. So like when we read Isaiah 13, yeah, it's reading something that happened in history, just like Isaiah is talking about something. He's writing something that's future in his day, because this is written in 590, and then you have the destruction that's coming in 586. So it is near, it's future. I mean, we can read it and glean like some of the language and the motif that God's using, because he uses the same language in Matthew chapter 24, just like Isaiah 13 with the decreation, this apocalyptic language Jesus uses about the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Talks about the stars falling from the sky and the sign of the Son of Man riding on the clouds, things like that. That same language is used, so we can go back to the Old Testament and glean the language, but not actually say, oh, this is a future event in the sense of, like, this is what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know if any of that made sense, but,
So do you see Christ at all in Ezekiel chapter 3?
I mean, Christ should be all over this, of course.
Well, if it's a local prophecy, then that, not really a foreshadow, then
I mean, when you read this, I mean, this is the motif of the Son of Man. I mean, all that kind of language is the same language that Christ used, referring to the house of Israel, and all this kind of stuff.
He's just calling Ezekiel son of man here.
Oh yeah,
Is that what he's
Ezekiel is called the Son of Man, but Christ uses that as well. I mean, Christ
was Jesus a prophet?
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah, as well.
Yeah,
I mean, more than a prophet, but definitely a prophet as well, it seems like.
Yeah, Deuteronomy 18 talks about, the prophet that shall arise amongst your brothers. You shall listen to him. Deuteronomy 18. It's like a famous passage. That's definitely referring to Jesus. I'll just read it real fast. Deuteronomy 18 says, it says, and I shall rise up a prophet. So look at verse 17 of Deuteronomy 18:17. And Yahweh said to me, they have spoken well what they have said. I shall rise up a prophet to them from among their brothers, one like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I shall command him. And it shall be, whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it at his hand. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, that which I have not commanded to him to speak. Oh, so definitely Jesus is the prophet that, because even in Acts chapter 3, Peter actually quotes that chapter of Deuteronomy and applies it to Christ.
Yeah, it shows a capital prophet in the King James.
Yeah, that's
Deuteronomy 18:18.
Yeah, and also if you look at Acts chapter 3, I believe is the chapter that it's quoted in. Right here, verse 22. For Moses indeed said to the fathers, Yahweh your Elohim will rise up to you a prophet from among your brothers, one like me. You shall hear him according to all things, whatever he may speak to you. And if you read the context, it's talking about Christ, of course. So Peter is the one that quotes that. So it's a direct quote from Deuteronomy. So yes, Jesus is a prophet.
Okay, so in Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 7,
Mm-hmm.
it says, but the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, for they are not willing to listen to me. Because all of the house of Israel have a hard forehead and a stubborn heart. So when we go to John chapter 8, verse 47, it says, whoever belongs to God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. Jesus is not actually saying that what Ezekiel chapter 3 was referring to was himself. He's just saying he's like Ezekiel in chapter 3.
Yeah, they're definitely, very similar for sure. I mean, I don't believe everybody that is like the Israel of God in Ezekiel's day were not actually the chosen ones, because the remnant was the one that was saved. The ones that were the hard-hearted ones were the ones that died when Nebuchadnezzar came in. And what's interesting is, because I had said this before today in the hangout earlier, that some of the things that Ezekiel is writing to is also to the northern house of Israel. Because if you look at verse 11 in chapter 3, it says, and go, come to the exiles, to the sons of your people, and speak to them, and say to them, so says the Lord God. So, the exiles, it could be referring to the first captivity, because according to this, he first starts writing in like 593. So 605 is, what we were reading in Second Kings, when like the magistry, the king people, when, like Daniel, all those people were taken captive into Babylon. So it could be referring to them. So like Ezekiel's like in the middle kind of that period when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and into the destruction in 586. So, yeah. Definitely pretty interesting stuff, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, I already thought I had something looking at Ezekiel with a covenantal lens and seeing, destruction of AD 70 prominent in there, especially since Revelation has the same language of Ezekiel, saying Ezekiel also bears witness of this prophecy of AD 70, but I guess not.
Yeah, no, but in a sense that it does, it has that same language, because that's what God uses. God uses that, the mountains or the earth. Hear, O heavens, and hear, O earth, what's about to happen to you.
But I have to look at 5:9 as being something different than the other. This is something that I will do and never will do again. Or I have to look at it as hyperbole. I mean, I usually, when I see something like that, I kind of take that kind of factual. So what you were saying, describing earlier, is that, well, this was actually, physical destruction of property in Ezekiel, and that's what he would never do again. But then in AD 70, I see the same thing. So,
I didn't mention anything about physical property. What I mentioned was that, in this captivity, you have, let's just say, let me just look at that verse again, 5:9, which says, and I will do in you that which I have not done, and which I will not do like it again, for all your abominations. So again, he kicks out Jerusalem, which he's only done once.
Well, he did it before, right? So, I mean,
this is his first time.
No, remember, we've already established that Ezekiel is prophesying after Nebuchadnezzar came in the first time.
Yeah, but not all Israel had gone there yet.
But partial of Israel had gone.
Yeah. So what's about to happen, so all this stuff that's leading up to is obviously the end, the 586 destruction. So what God's going to do, that 586 destruction, is only going to happen one time, and it's never going to be like that ever again. Taking God's people in a sense like that and bringing them into that land after they were in the land, bringing them into the land of, their enemies. That only happened once, and it's in 586. Then they come back during the, Ezra and Nehemiah, and they build the walls, and then they build the temple again. And that's the same temple that they were in when Christ came. There wasn't another temple. That was the second temple. There's only two temples. So the first temple was destroyed, and the captives...
So you're saying Ezekiel's never will occur again is the exile, and Matthew 24's never will
is
be
the divorce.
It's
the ending. It's the ending of Israel. In Ezekiel's time, Israel didn't end. They came back into the land. And that's why, like, some partial preterists, like a famous one, I think his name was Gary DeMar, he actually says, like, when you read about the valley of dry bones, that's Ezekiel prophesying, saying, hey, yes, this exile is going to be terrible. Everything's going to be destroyed, but, we're going to come back to life. We're going to go back into the land. And that's Ezekiel 37. But I don't take that as that. I take that, as Christ, because it says David will be there, obviously Christ, and then the new covenant. And, whenever they came back to the land, they didn't there wasn't a new covenant. It was still the same Mosaic covenant when they came back to the land. And however long, 500 or 4 something. I forget what year they came back. Let me see. I have my timeline up right now. So they came back in 458, back in Jerusalem during 458 to 457. The second group of the Jews returned. Actually, no.
When did the 70-year captivity begin?
That's a good question.
Well,
I guess 605 to 535.
I don't understand. So when we're talking about the captivity, then are we saying after everyone was captured, or when the first people were captured? Because there's multiple capturing. So when we talk about the 70 years, is that referring to the entire group, or starting with the partial group and then adding more as the 70 years culminates, or what?
Well, I know according to this Nehemiah, it says back in Jerusalem during 458 BC, the second group of Jews returned to the land with the leadership of Ezra. In 444 BC, King Artaxerxes allowed Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls of the city because Jerusalem walls were broken down.
Are
Nehemiah
they
1-3.
to be within that 70-year captivity, even though they're allowed to go out and build?
No, this is in 458 BC. So Artaxerxes allows Nehemiah to go to Ezra. So I guess at some point Ezra
ends the 70-year right there, is what you're saying?
So it says, okay, so the first group of people to return to the land was in 538 BC under the leadership of Zerubbabel. Ezra chapter 2, 1-2. When they came into the land, they built an altar and kept the feast of Sukkot, Ezra 3, 1-7. The rebuilding of the temple took place between 538 and 515 BC. During the time of, and then that's Esther's story. She comes in 483.
538 minus 70 years, which would be 6-something, is when the captivity took place.
Yeah, so they're saying they're saying that the first captivity was in 605.
What?
So when Daniel was a part of the first exile, and that was in 605 BC. So 605, 635, somewhere around that period.
So in the 70-year captivity, we've got, I'm just trying to understand. I'm not trying to make a trick question.
No, it's okay.
Right,
I'm trying to relearn it too.
So in the 70-year period of captivity, it starts out having a portion of the group being in captivity. Mm-hmm. And then after the 70-year captivity, there's a portion that's allowed to go out, but yet there's still others that are within that captivity.
Yeah, because you got to remember Babylon in 605. So Nebuchadnezzar is king. He's ruling. But even during Daniel, we see that Daniel chapter 5, a new king comes along. Nebuchadnezzar's done. The Medes have come in. So you got, the statue. Remember, you got, the head of gold, and then you have the new king. And what I wrote here was Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians on October 12th, 539 BC. So 539 BC is now you have the new kings coming in, no longer Nebuchadnezzar. And then that's the same time period. You have 539, then around 538, 535, Zerubbabel with, Ezra and Zerubbabel go to Jerusalem. They're allowed back. And because in the year, so this is so I wrote here, in the year 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus II began to rule over Babylon. God appointed him to build the house of the Lord. Ezra chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Let me just read that real quick. If somebody can pull it up faster, but
Okay, so I've always looked at 70 years as all of them were in captivity and then all of them were freed. But the way it reads is that partial of them was at the start of the 70 AD, the 70-year period. And then after the 70-year period, still many of them were in captivity, but some of them were allowed to leave. So
exactly.
I see.
And that's what happened because Ezra and Zerubbabel, they build the temple and they perform, feast days. But the problem was they didn't have a border. They didn't have walls. And then that's when Nehemiah comes in. Because in 444, so you're talking about almost 100 years later, you have Nehemiah returning to Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls of the city of Jerusalem because they were broken down. The walls were rebuilt in only 52 days. And then I think that's when people start counting the 70 weeks, because I wrote here, in the process of Nehemiah's efforts, fulfilled Daniel's prophecy that the walls of Jerusalem would be rebuilt in difficult times. Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Because in Daniel, that's when they talk about the 490 years or whatever. They say, know then and understand that from the issuing of the word to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem to the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks of 62 weeks. So you have the 70 weeks. So if you start counting at 444 and count 490 years, I guess that brings you around to Yeshua's death maybe. So 444 minus 490 or something like that. So it brings you close around some time period around that time.
I think you're on the wrong one. I think it's
somehow
458.
Yeah, something like that.
Those always get confusing if it's the 444
you're right.
Nehemiah
Yes.
or the 458
Yes.
Ezra.
Yeah, because if I read from the beginning, I wrote here for Nehemiah. It says, back in Jerusalem during 458 BC to 457 BC, the second group of Jews returned to the land with the leadership of Ezra. So when that happened, then you have, I guess that's when you start 458. So 458 minus 490. Yeah, so you're looking at negative 32. So it'd be including year 0, so 31, around 30 AD. So that gives you when the Messiah will be cut off at the 69th week or something like that, the 70th week or whatever.
There's really two prophecies about the returning to the land then. There's the returning to the land in Nehemiah's time, and then there's the returning to the land that James speaks about.
Yeah, they were returning to the land, but that wasn't the true fulfillment of the land. Because the true land was a heavenly land. See, all this stuff need to happen to bring in, the new covenant, to bring in the Messiah. That's just how it all played out. It all was for the grand prize. It's pretty fascinating, I would say. It makes sense in my mind. it kind of all kind of flows pretty good. But again, everything that I just read is I'm reading from my Old Testament timeline I did for school. So all my dates and everything are from my school's book, but not everything is wrong, you know?
Yeah, I know.
So what?
I was just saying, I was on mute, sorry, that I always take these dates with a grain of salt because
Yeah.
they don't know for sure when these dates were. You know, usually if they're honest, they'll give you a range.
Nah, these people, they can actually tell you the day. They'll be like October 15th.
Sure, right. Good luck with that.
See, I literally wrote here in my report because I'm quoting it from my book. October 12th, 539 BC is when Babylon fell. Because there's some way they can figure it out because it probably says in Daniel chapter 5, mentions something.
No, but when you look at these scholarly articles and these church traditions and you see what they believe and then they give the citations, when you actually look up the citations, you're like, how did they get that?
Yeah.
But you just talked about that in the dating of Revelation, you know.
Well, it's because this stuff is more like history. You know?
Yeah, but technically, archaeologists can't really even prove that David existed.
That what?
That
Well,
David.
some things they can, but pretty rare that they can't. You know, some things they have like they wrote the date, you know, where this a strong astrological event took place, so they can do that. Or, you know, sometimes they wrote like it was the 10th year of this king, so they might have an idea. But generally, there's, you know, like you say, Stacy, it's like how accurate can they really be? You know, they have an idea, but, you know, can they really pinpoint it to that year?
Right.
Yeah. No,
I think
I'll
a
definitely
lot of
give a
times
couple years
they'll
off.
yeah, a lot of times even like in when they cite it, they'll be like they'll have a error factor. They'll say like, you know, on this we have a 1 to 2 year error factor, or we have a 3 to 5 year error factor. They'll have things of that nature sometimes.
And the whole idea of, you know, before the birth of Christ, now you have to start counting backwards. I basically, when I'm with BC, I don't really even pay attention to the date. It just glosses over my head.
Yeah, Ezekiel's definitely going to get more interesting as we get into it for sure. It's definitely a power-packed book with a lot of depth
It's probably
to it.
the most, I would say it's probably the most metaphorical book in the Old Testament.
I'd say it's one of the most debated books too.
And compared to Revelation, metaphorical book in the New Testament.
Oh, I'd also say it's very misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like Revelation as well. You know, I've read Ezekiel quite a few times, but it's been a few years since I've read it.
Also, I mean, I just remembered, you know, in Ezekiel chapter 3, in verse 26, it says, "And I will make your tongue cling in your mouth, so that you shall be mute and unable to reprove yourself, for they are a rebellious house." I mean, when I look at that, I can immediately look at Christ, where you know he's being told, you know, I have the ability of life and death, and are you going to remain silent to me? So I guess I would, have to say then that Christ is portraying Ezekiel in this passage when he's remaining silent, when his accusers are accusing him. And it's really not about Christ. This is about Ezekiel and audience relevance in Ezekiel chapter 3. But it just happens to be that Christ also did this.
It's
Yeah, I
definitely
mean,
a lot of similar language for sure.
it's like the things in like Isaiah, like I had brought up. I mean, just read Isaiah chapter 13 and 14. Talk about, Lucifer, how you have fallen. That's that same passage that I read, but it's about Babylon, about Nebuchadnezzar is about to be like that king of Babylon's going to be destroyed.
Yeah,
They're over.
Really, I don't know if you heard this before in our other hangout, whether it's been published yet or not. The way I look at that is, even though he's talking about the king of Babylon, I think right now, I believe that he's talking about the king of Mystery Babylon. Because the only one that was in the Garden of Eden was basically Israel, because they were the ones in covenant.
Yeah, but now that's a different passage. The one about the Garden of Eden is the king of Tyre in Ezekiel. I'm talking about Isaiah chapters 14 and 11 or 12 or something like that.
Right.
Called a night here, brothers.
Okay.
All right, bro.
All right, love you guys.
Love you too, bro.
All right, night.
But yeah, so like what I'm saying is, and I heard, I've been listening to the hangouts with the covenantal lens and stuff like that. I just,
No,
you can see it that way.
It appears, if you look at it with the covenantal lens, if he's talking about mountains and valleys, and he's really referring to the people, that also, as far as if he's referring to another nation, it could be similar, because why would God want a prophet from Israel to prophesy to another nation who he has no contact with about their destruction, unless he's really, if you look at it through the covenantal lens, it always has to do with Israel.
But if you think about it, though, the prophecy is given to Israel because they're going to be captive in that land, knowing that, they're going to be destroyed. Your captors, they're also going to fall. And that's what Isaiah is talking about. Like,
yeah, but I'm now referring to Tyre.
Yeah, I brought up the Isaiah 13, which is the burden of Babylon. This is the destruction of the king of Babylon, which according to chapter 14, verse 12, is Lucifer, the morning star. So all that is referring to Babylon in, 600 and 500 BC. The whole thing. So there's not like, but the things that we can glean from it are things that are, the type of language and stuff like that. But even the Ezekiel part, I would still say it's a man, not, and then during that same time period, I think it's chapter 28 or something like that. Is it 28?
I think it is 28.
Yeah. The Son of Man, lift up the lament over the king of Tyre and say to him,
But really and truly, did Ezekiel have access to the king of Tyre, or is this just prophesying, telling the people of Israel that this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think the second part. Because it's for the people that are going to obviously read it, which would be the righteous people.
But
You know, the sinners aren't reading this stuff.
you have obvious prophecies where he's actually prophesying and he's calling Jerusalem Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have clearly he's talking to Jerusalem and Israel, but he's calling them another nation. And then we have,
of course, I agree.
Mystery Babylon, but in these other specific cases, oh, well, he's really talking about the king of Tyre and really talking about the king of Babylon. And
I think it's the overall context. So we can't just say, 100% of the time it's all metaphorical and, I guess covenantal lens in that sense. I mean, we can glean from it for sure, but I mean, we need to also do, just like we do with the New Testament, audience relevance, who is he talking to, what's being addressed. That's also very important, which, we would need to do with these passages as well, because the problem is the futurists use these passages the same way they do the New Testament and say, oh, this is all future. This has nothing to do with them. It had to do with us. So futurists will read Matthew chapter 24 and say, oh, this is, a future generation. Then they'll read Ezekiel, then they'll read Isaiah, then they'll read Jeremiah and be like, oh, this is talking about us too. Not realizing that actually, no, Jeremiah is talking to the people of Jeremiah's day, and, Paul's talking about people in his day. For the most part, for sure.
Right. I'm just not entirely convinced because, we already have language of, prophesy to the mountains and to the valleys. We have other mentions of these other nations, but not really them, but he's talking about Israel. He's just calling them these other nations. And so if you look at it through a covenantal lens, he's always addressing and talking to Israel, because that's who that's whose God's inheritance was. That's, the people that he was dealing with all throughout. So,
yeah, I mean, but you can't do that for every instance. That's what I'm saying. So like when I brought up Isaiah 13 and 14, this is definitely like an historical, like, the Bible actually confirms that this actually happens in the book of Daniel. Like when Nebuchadnezzar is brought down low, when his kingdom is taken down low, is Daniel chapter 5. That literally happens. And that's not about, Israel. It's literally about Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon. It falls in one day. Okay. By the hands of the Medes. And that's what it says here in Isaiah 13, verse 17. It talks about God doing this, but, the same thing, the day of the Lord, God uses another nation to do that. So he says that he's going to come down and destroy Babylon, but actually he uses the Medes and the Persians. They're the ones that go in and actually do that.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I definitely, I'm a full preterist, so I definitely can see the, obviously, Israel's called, Sodom and Gomorrah. They're called Egypt, because Revelation chapter 11 says that's Babylon. That's the whore, So in that sense, yeah, she is, being called different things.
I've heard you, and it's got a lot of weight to consider. So I will hold off on my, thinking that this is all 70 AD. But I am very interested in where in Ezekiel, when we get to it, where that cutoff will be of within Ezekiel's lifetime versus when he's talking about in the future.
Yeah.
Definitely. What chapter or area that if we could draw a line, because I would like to see that for sure. So
yeah, hopefully I could be on for that. I mean, I start school again on Monday, so it's going to be really crazy. So,
well, you got Acts, and what is your other class?
It is
I think you told me, but I forgot.
Intercultural communication and engagement.
Okay, intercultural.
And like I actually have to like make videos and stuff for some of the projects. But it's still like Christian. It still has to do like with spreading the gospel to like, it's kind of like my other classes where it's just like, you know, intercultural communication and engagement to spread the gospel message to different cultures and communities.
And basically it's a class on bridge building.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have to like, it says for me to find a friend or a coworker that's, you know, from another country that's grew up in a different culture, different religion. But if you can't find one, then make a fictitious person, which I'll do that because I don't really know anybody that's from another country that's, you know, another religion and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine who you would pick. Would you pick a Jewish person or a Hindu?
I'm probably going to do a Muslim. Because I have to kind of like convey the message of the gospel and like it's kind of like win them over to Christ kind of, and then I have to make like the last report. It's kind of like this class is it's one big project that you do in smaller parts kind of, and like the last part is like a 10-minute video because you have to be able to speak clear and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm gonna have to buy, which I've been meaning to buy anyways. I mean, I bought this made this, you know, built this computer so I can, you know, every time I ever go on these video chats, it's always with my phone. So maybe I could start doing like what Rob does, using the computer, you know.
Right.
You know, that's why I have this computer. So I'm gonna do that, but I'm also gonna buy a laptop because I need one.
So after you post your video for your class, I'd like you to post it on Discord if you could. I'd like to
Probably. I mean, it's probably obviously going to be an A project. I'm going to get an A, so. Yeah, but holy crap, it's 1 o'clock. I had to wake up when my son wakes up, probably like 6. So how many hours is that? 5 hours of sleep? You waking up early tomorrow?
Well, I've been averaging 2 hours of sleep a day, except every third day I might get 6 or 7 hours. So.
Oh wow! Did you drink any wine tonight?
Yeah, I've had a whole bottle. So.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow, you don't sound like it.
I feel a little drowsy, but not necessarily so. So I'll probably try to wind down or something and watch some YouTube or something.
Yeah.
And get some sleep. But actually, technically, this is one of my 2-hour sleep days. So I may end up taking a nap around 5 o'clock in the morning or something. I have no idea.
Oh wow.
I really do wish I could sleep. It's getting old, but anyway.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It probably sucks.
Keep me in prayer.
Yeah, definitely, man, for sure. Well, I hope you have a good YouTube video watching.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, it was fun. I haven't been on here in a while.
I know you haven't. Just briefly pop in and pop out.
Yeah. It was just.
Gotta come in often to set me straight. So.
Obviously, I've been listening to you go crazy now. Just like I was listening. I was like, he just posted today. You guys reading Ezekiel 1-4. So I was listening to that today. So it's just that's the only thing that sucks about this Discord thing, that it takes so long to be, you know, for the video to load. Because of course I can imagine, you know, you gotta, you know, load all that stuff up. You know, you got a 5-hour video that's gonna take like, especially if you know you don't have the greatest computer in the world, that's gonna take a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I definitely
Good night. You have a blessed weekend this weekend.
Yeah, man. You too, bro. Much love.
Good night.
Get some sleep, man.